I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, the group leader of Toronto Awakening Sharing Group. I'm also the president of Spiritual Awakenings International, but here at Toronto Awakening Sharing Group is the opportunity where I like to encourage Canadian speakers to present. So we, now that we're online and not live, actually have people from all around the world coming to attend our events. So please take a moment now and just type into the chat where it is you're joining us from. We always love to know. I am joining you from Toronto, Canada. Our speaker today, Dr. Jeffrey Overall, is joining you from Brantford, I think that's what you said, Brantford, Ontario. And we have someone from Oregon. Oh, we have someone else from Utah, someone from Smiths Falls, Ontario, Waterloo, Ontario. Welcome, everybody. Oh, we have somebody from the UK. That's awesome. We have 3 countries here today. Amazing what we can do with online presentations. Welcome, everybody. So it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. It's Dr. Jeffrey Overall. Dr. Overall has a PhD in business management, and he is a professor of conscious economics and entrepreneurship. He studies the link between consciousness and mental health, optimum performance, productivity, sustainability, ethics, spirituality, and more. He also studies the causes of entrepreneurial and organizational successes and failures. He has nearly 50 publications and is the author of Capitalist Buddha, Waking Up Conscious Economics. Dr. Overall has been an academic for over a decade and was a tenured professor at Ontario Tech University. He also held professorships at Nipissing University and Ryerson University. And internationally, he taught at universities in Germany, Russia, and Britain. So welcome, Dr. Jeffrey Overall.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated for the opportunity to speak here with everyone today. I'm very much excited. So I'm going to share with you my talk today on navigating the path to awakening. And it's a spiritual experience of it's a personal journey as well as research that I've conducted throughout my spiritual transformation so I could really understand what was happening to me. So my intention for the talk today is to share my experiences with you and hoping that it can teach you something and that it resonates in your heart. So I'm going to talk about my pre-awakening journey that began around 9 years ago, is what I'm going to focus on today. I'm going to talk about a Kundalini Awakening experience that I had, and then I'm going to share some of my consciousness expansion research leading into my own Kensho awakening. And then I'm going to talk about my vision of conscious economics, what that is. And then I'm going to talk about some of the trends that I've been researching within the consciousness expansion industry and space. So I'm going to talk about my unawakened mind and a brush with death that I had. And it started at an academic conference. And just to give you an idea of where my unawakened mind was at the time, I was presenting at a conference, and the title of my presentation was The Selfish Gene: Bounded Rationality and the Implications for Rational Egoism. So I was very much interested in studying the polarity, the spectrum of egoism and altruism. I was very much in this black and white space, and I really went deep into the gene theory on selfishness and trying to really understand the roots of that dichotomy between egoism and altruism. So I was fully asleep, unawakened at that particular point in time. So I was at this conference in Las Vegas. It was early in my academic career. I'd never been to Las Vegas before and haven't gone back. So what my experience was is I was at this conference. I had far too much to drink at the conference dinner. I went back to my room and started to drink a little bit more by myself. And then I went to bed. I woke up in the bathroom on the floor. I had passed out. I had no recollection of how I got there. I had an extremely massive headache and I just went back to bed. And then I woke up myself maybe a couple of minutes later and I was saying, whoa, wait a second. Waking up on the bathroom floor with a headache is not normal. I turned on the light and I looked at my pillow and there was a pool of blood on my pillow, and I went to the washroom and looked on the floor and there was a pool of blood on the floor, and then I started to panic. And I rushed myself to the hospital. Good thing for my university medical insurance, because the bill that was sent to my insurance provider was 25,000 US. So what I had learned was that I went to go to the washroom to relieve myself, and I had lost consciousness. I just passed out, and luckily there was a wall right behind where I was standing, and I fell and hit my head in the wall. And if that wall wasn't there, because usually there's not a wall like right behind your toilet, and if that wall wasn't there, I think I would have been in a far worse experience than I had been. So I was severely concussed, and then 3 to 4 weeks later, I had planned to go and walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. So I was still very heavily concussed, and I was very much in this state of being non-religious and also very spiritually cynical, I would say. And again, I was still like navigating this research interest around the pursuit of selfishness, the virtuous of selfishness. I got really into the philosophy of Ayn Rand. So while I was on this pilgrimage of walking from the south of France far into Spain, I was really starting to witness a lot of pain and suffering around me. Even the whole pilgrimage itself was, it was a metaphor, I felt, of really my own pain, because I was just witnessing it around me. I was witnessing people struggle, carrying bags, walking hundreds of kilometers, and all of the imagery around just going into these old historic buildings, churches. I actually took this picture. It was like outside of a church and just watching like, an image of Jesus, like dead, bleeding, and then looking around all of the images in the churches, and it was all just this experience of suffering. And I was really deeply reflecting on my own experiences of suffering throughout this process. And being drawn to do a pilgrimage was also just fascinating for me as I look back on it afterwards. And I was really ignoring my own destructive patterns of behavior. I was really blind to the culture of burnout that I was functioning within. Before I entered academia, I'd been an entrepreneur. And in the entrepreneurship community, it's very much revered to work long hours. Like I was working 65, 70 hours a week for a decade. Um, and then I started to get sick. I ended up getting Lyme disease, and I didn't listen to my body. I still kept trying to push myself beyond. And then a couple of years later, I ended up getting hypothyroidism as a result of the immune system issues that I was getting as a result of the Lyme disease. So I was working long hours, I was burnt out, and it was just manifesting in illness. And I was just not listening to my body. I didn't know how to do that. I was so cerebral as an academic and just very much in the mind. So I walked 800 kilometers to Santiago. I did it in 28 days. And the next summer, I was called to another pilgrimage. And I walked 350 kilometers from Tuscany down to Rome. And I didn't really understand until afterwards that I was really just going through a spiritual purification, I would call it. Just doing two back-to-back pilgrimages in this over a 2-year period was really just interesting when I reflect on it. And I was again continuing all these really same patterns of behavior. I was really just so entrenched in this challenging egoism and altruism. I'd written several peer-reviewed academic journal articles on this topic, and I was really looking at, altruism as a self-sacrifice, and I was really perceiving it as evil. And then a couple of months after, I had met a old university friend of mine, and we went for a smoothie in downtown Toronto, literally Yonge and Wellington area. And it was in October, and we were sitting on a patio and sharing a smoothie. And she was telling me about this near-death experience that she had when she was in Nunavut working on a Truth and Reconciliation program. And I was just listening to the story, and then all of a sudden, like, we just stopped, and everything in, a crowded downtown Toronto core area in the middle of the day on a work week. It was just everything was silent. And like all I could experience was this person that was sitting across from me. And we just felt this thickness of energy. And we didn't understand what it was. And we just remembered each other across lifetimes. And we had a full joint Kundalini awakening. The two of us had it at the exact same time. And it lasted for 8 days. We had full telepathic connection with each other, astral traveling, very much mystical experiences, past life memories, nothing I've ever heard of before or had experienced in my life. So I had no happening to me. It actually made me very sick because of I was receiving some treatment for my Lyme disease and also my hypothyroidism, and it caused me to go into a severe Herxheimer reaction. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. It progressively got worse and worse and worse to the point where it nearly killed me. I was hospitalized for 11 days, and it was just my health catching up to me. And after 3 days of just being completely incoherent, I had a nurse just, tap me on my shoulder and wake me up and whispered in my ear saying that they saved my life. So this was an extremely transformative, intense, for lack of a better word, experience. And I had no idea what was happening to me or what had happened to me. So spiritually transformative experiences became my research because I needed to know what it was that I had experienced, what was happening to me. So I completely shifted my research agenda and focus onto this. So I started to understand some of the common experiences that other people were having, and there were feelings of euphoria, happiness. People were having astral travel. I had no idea what that was. I mean, I was tapping into senses beyond the five that I had typically been experiencing in my life up to that point. I was an empiricist. I was very much, holding on to the Newtonian perspective of research, is that if you can't see it or feel it, then it doesn't exist, basically. So then just going into other people having past life memories, increased creativity, unlocking healing powers, increased intellectual powers, all of these different things um, was really starting to become more in tuned within myself, but also being able to see what was happening with others around me. And then I did some research, empirical research on Kundalini awakenings, and I came upon some data from 19 individuals who had undergone a Kundalini awakening. And what I found is that it was an average of 15 years of the unfolding of the Kundalini process. There was an 8 to 10 average intensity, 8 to 10 months of intensity of the dark night of the soul. Sorry, 8 to 10 on a scale. So at a scale of 10 of being extremely intense, zero being not intense at all, people were getting around the 8 to 10 level of the dark night of the soul, and the average experience of their dark night of the soul had gone for 2.5 years. So I was really, I'm not pleased isn't the right word to say, because people are suffering and so was I, but at least I was able to know that other people were having a similar experience that I was. And from the research that I did, what I found was that confusion was very much linked to the intensity of the dark night of the soul and difficulties that people were having in integrating their life before their awakening and their life afterwards. There was this major tension that people were having with, okay, after that happened, how do I go back to my life before that? So there was a lot of these really challenging integration experiences. And another surprising factor that I found was that being in spiritual communities could also have integration challenges for people. I was finding that these communities might shape people's experiences, and it really emphasized for me the importance of having solitude and also a spiritual practice to help integrate these experiences. And I'm going to share some challenges that I experienced throughout my spiritual journey. And here's two of them that I think might be helpful for some people. And it was that the first one was difficulty in integrating the experience of their spiritually transformative experience into their everyday life. And I found that practicing grounding techniques of being present and trying to stay balanced was really, really helpful for me. I integrated daily and even throughout the day grounding practices of just being in nature. I still spend 2 hours a day, every day in nature, in a forest, among the trees. That's so helpful that I found. And the second challenge is feeling isolated or misunderstood by other people who are not on a similar path as you or haven't had similar experiences. So this is kind of the double-edged sword of the community. It's seek out like-minded people for support and sharing, but also maintain that solitude for yourself and feel into what your own experiences are. So after my Kundalini awakening, I, became so hungry for consciousness expansion and wanting to learn so much. I traveled over, a couple of year period, just visiting 9 countries, like working with over nearly 100 different practitioners from all different types of traditions. Like I was just drawn to all different spiritual traditions, different consciousness expanding modalities. New Age, indigenous, Zen Buddhism, my roots being Catholic, I was very much drawn to some of the Christian as well, shamanism, even Rastafarianism. I was drawn to a lot of them. And the other challenge that I witnessed was the desire, and I think it's culturally, at least in an industrialized North American context, to want to have instant gratification. And I was really, really rushing my spiritual evolution and my healing. And it was interesting. I'm working on a paper right now, and it's having me look at this tendency that I've witnessed and observed in some spiritual communities around this need to continue to heal. And it just perpetuates the belief that there's something wrong with us, that we need to continue to always be healing something. So I think a good strategy is to just be patient, be kind to yourself, and really set realistic goals and just congratulate yourself on your incremental development and, recognize that we don't actually do anything, just life happens. So I think that's really an important thing that I learned is that you can't force really anything. So just shifting a little bit to more of the research that I was falling into was after recognizing after my Kundalini awakening that I had burnt out. I burnt myself to a crisp. I'd been working unsustainably for a decade and then really recognized that my own burnout was mirroring what I was seeing externally within society and became aware of being in the midst of a global mental health crisis. And what I learned through my research in 2020, here's some data around it. It was that 2.5 trillion annually was being lost as a result of people suffering and people struggling with their mental health. This was affecting companies with billions of dollars in productivity loss. And then over a 2-year period during COVID, the cost just ballooned, it doubled to 5 trillion. And the data is suggesting that by 2030, the cost of mental health are going to be $6 trillion. So this caused me to really reflect on my career as an entrepreneur, what I was teaching in business schools, and what I was really witnessing in just the world of commerce, and really recognize that there was a real need for what I call conscious economics. And I have this Venn diagram here, and it's really the intersection of everything related to consciousness expansion and socioeconomics, sociopolitics, and it's just bringing those two together. And some of the things that are in the middle are truth and reconciliation, really this desire for unity consciousness, rational egoism or spiritual egoism, which I like to call, is really just a focus on the long term as opposed to the short term. So I was really, really trying to bridge consciousness expansion and economics and economic prosperity together. I really wanted to wake up business leaders to the benefits of consciousness expansion and how they can help, employees, the labor force, organizations, help people, heal or improve their mental health and just help people become, I guess, untethered to this unawakened mind. So it really shifted me into reflecting on some of those philosophies that I was talking about, at the beginning of my talk when I was really just deeply ingrained in this egoism, altruism debate and philosophy. And it's so fascinating now that I can look back with a new awareness or a new perspective. It was that, life or spirit or the universe was really drawing me to these types of philosophies and knowledge prior to my awakening so that I could look at them from a different perspective. And I wrote this book called Capitalist Buddha, Waking Up to Conscious Economics. And one of the contributions of that book was around this philosophy of selfishness and self-interest and long-term self-interest. And what I did was I shifted the definition of, focusing on and working on your long-term self-interest, and I really situated it in three areas. One was karma, the universal, law of cause and effect, and that whatever actions have a corresponding reaction that occur to balance our cause and effect and the energy that occurs with our behaviors. And then I went back into the gene theory, and I knew that when people behave in certain ways in society, those become social norms and they become propagated in the way that we function in our societies and our realities, so that, unethical behaviors are often propagated and occur in organizations, the same as ethical behavior. So what I became aware of is that in terms of genes is that, if we're behaving in unethical ways, our kin, our future genes are going to be in environments that are unhealthy. So that was a really interesting dynamic to include into my definition. And then I also integrated reincarnation from my own lived experiences. And I argued that if people are operating in a business context in their long-term self-interest, when they're considering the cause and effect of their actions and the karma that is associated with it, reincarnation and the fact that, if they behave in an immoral way, they may have to account for that in a future life. And as well as their genes from the natural science perspective. So then I was saying, if people are behaving in their long-term interest, they're going to be really mindful of these three particular areas and will perhaps behave more ethically if they were aware of these three dynamics in the future. So then this was going back almost 3 years ago, I attended a self-inquiry enlightenment intensive. And I had a Kensho, Spiritual Awakening. I had no idea what a Kensho was. I went with my joint Kundalini partner that was sitting across from me over the smoothie. And just like before, she had a Kensho awakening, and we were doing the modality of being in dyads. And she was sitting across from me, and I again, sitting across from the same person, had a Kensho awakening almost 12 hours later. So I had no idea what that was. I didn't know an awakening was even possible as part of this intensive. I went in completely naive to it, and then focus some research around what a Kensho is. And I learned through my research is that Kensho is the Zen term for awakening to your true nature. Ken means seeing or knowing. Sho means true nature or essence. And it's really the first step on the path to enlightenment. So Kenshos can be a glimpse or they can be permanent. So there's really just this flip of an identification of shifting out of the egoic self structure or the mind, and then falling into your true unlimited self. It's really the I am, basically, and this true nature of awareness that's always been present. The people reflect sensations of having an awareness of never being born and will never die. So as soon as I came out of this Kensho awakening, I was thrust into a dark night of the soul experience. And through that process, I really became aware of my shadows. I was doing a lot of shadow work, and I had become aware of, framing my life in through the lens of self-sabotage, but really just understanding that it was a reorganization that I noticed from my own experiences and the research that I started to do on Dark Night of the Souls. And I learned actually a very powerful awareness that actually emerged from Dr. Kason's talk that she gave several months ago. And the biggest takeaway that I had from the Dark Night of the Soul is that it's really just a test of our faith. And it highlighted for me the importance of maintaining faith. And it's like, what I learned from Dr. Kason was that, when everything's great and life is full of bliss, it's really easy at that particular point to maintain your faith. But when everything, seemingly falls apart or it feels like is being stripped away and you've got nothing left to hold on to but your faith, that's what you really have to hold on to in those moments. And I learned that, and that was a really powerful, timely awareness that came through to me. And the challenge number 4 was that, dark nights of the soul can be very crucial phases in the process of awakening and growth. We can experience these feelings of despair and meaninglessness, perceived loss of connection to the divine or our spiritual path. And it really just brings forward some of our deepest fears, our deepest wounds, these core beliefs that have been with us maybe since the beginning of our incarnation. And one of the strategies that really helped me was that recognizing the impermanence of everything, the impermanence of peak state, of, bliss, and also the impermanence of the pits of a dark night of the soul, and recognizing that it's a blessing. And what's really helpful for people that are navigating a dark night is have good friends, good food, and good music. And those are really, really helpful to keep us keep our frequency at a level where we can heal and grow and expand our vibrational frequency. And it's that, these challenging times, like I said, pass, and having that support, therapeutic support, is also really helpful. And just know that contractions always follow with an expansion. And that's just really the rule of nature. And the next dark night of the soul, challenge number 5, is that, like I said, we can get stuck in this healing, just we need to heal more, we need to heal our shadow, and we're always trying to fix something. And it's just really perpetuating the belief that, there's something wrong with us or we're not enough. And it doesn't allow us to actually be present, because there's this future state that we're constantly striving towards to attain. So the strategy that worked for me was balancing healing with being present. And don't go digging. What I mean digging is searching for stuff that's wrong with you, looking for things that need to be healed. And what I've learned is that, life will present experiences for us and will bring awareness to us of what we need to heal. And that will just occur naturally. We don't need to force anything, like I said. So then I wanted to do research more on Kensho awakenings. So I interviewed 13 people that had a Kensho awakening, and then I also interviewed 13 people who didn't. And I did a mixed method approach, and I really wanted to understand what are the factors that lead to people to have this type of spiritual awakening? And what are the factors that block them? And what I learned is that the main contributing factors to people having these types of awakenings was a dark night of the soul, having prior awakening experiences through their life, having childhood spiritual experiences like, tapping into clairaudience, clairsentience, all the types of clairs. And there was really this seeking internally of really going within. Trauma was a big part of it, and strong egos and self-sabotage behaviors I had witnessed. And what I learned was the main findings was that the childhood spiritual experiences and prior awakenings had occurred in every one of the people that I interviewed. And what I concluded was that life and the incarnation was just a spiritual purification ceremony where we were just going through life and we're healing, maybe ancient traumas, and that it was just this unfolding that occurred throughout all of these people's lives that got them to this state of this flip in awareness, this consciousness expansion, which I found really fascinating and resonated deeply for me. And on the mirror image of it, what blocked people from having these types of awakenings was their seeking was outside of themselves. They weren't, they were constantly looking to give their power away. There was a lot of delusion and confusion that was occurring, a lot of unprocessed emotions, in particular around anger and rage. And there was this searching for something greater, and it was always outside of the self. And what I learned is that a lot of these people, from my own experience as well, was that this belief of not being enough and really needing to search outside for something to validate. And the eerie thing for me that I learned was that a lot of these people were looking for a guru, a teacher, a master, and somebody that they could give their power away to. And it alerted me to the potential that some of these people could be primed to enter a cult. And the next challenge that I became aware of was that there's a belief that I've observed in some spiritual communities is that peak spiritual experiences can only occur outside of the self through entheogens or in the presence of a healer, a shaman, a guru, or a ceremony. And what I learned is that the most the biggest peak experiences that I ever had in my life came out of nowhere. And just like a awakening can occur any second, any time. You could be having a smoothie with an old friend from university in the middle of the downtown core Toronto, and it'll just pop off out of nowhere. And what I learned is the importance of maintaining the don't know mind. And this is something that comes out of the Zen Buddhist philosophy. And it's just having no expectations, no preferences, and no seeking of any type of peak experiences. And what my spiritual journey led me to be interacting with three cults. And what I learned is that what I'll call through the Great Awakening, my research is showing that more and more people are having these types of experiences. And there's also an increase of these charismatic leaders and people that aren't aware because they're new onto this path of spiritual evolution. They're so willing to give their power away. And the thing that I learned is that spiritually, no one has something that you don't have. no, of course you can read books and you can, be a student, but you don't guru. You'll find everything that you need to know if you just are patient and allow life to unfold. And challenge number 6 for me is what I call the Santa Claus effect, where there's this misinterpretation of teachings by masters, gurus, teachers, leaders that can affect individuals, and they can be persuaded to follow a guru's superstitions. And I think it's really important, a very important strategy for people to think critically. As a professor, I've witnessed over time that thinking critically is really falling out of our education system. And it's so important for us to think critically, to learn how to think critically, to question everything, to do our own research. And I know during the pandemic and some other areas of our life, people were discouraged to do their own research. And I highly recommend question everything, do your own research, and make sure that whatever you're being told resonates within your body. That is so important. I have a very close friend of mine, and her husband is a former military professional, and he teaches um, pilots to learn survival skills for if they get, shot down out of the plane in the middle of the jungle or whatever. And when he starts his teachings, he comes into the classroom and says, you're shot out of your plane, you're behind enemy lines, you have a parachute and a knife. And then he asks, what is your most important tool? And people talk about the knife, and some people say the parachute. And he says, it's your body, it's your intuition. That is your strongest tool. And it's really important to maintain a group of trusted non-spiritual friends. I know this can be triggering for some of us when we're on our spiritual journey and we're of senses beyond our own. I think it's just a really good extra level of critical thinking that we can be exposed to when we share our experiences with others, because I've researched very heavily the limitations of the mind and our conscious mind. My academic research before my awakening, it's so fascinating how, life or spirit puts us in these experiences. My doctoral research was understanding how people rationalize their unethical decisions. And I learned so deeply how the mind works in terms of rationalizations. And in some ways, it can be a blessing that I know how the mind works, and it also can be a curse because when I'm rationalizing something or I'm justifying something, I immediately know I'm rationalizing. And then I'm like, oh man, I'm doing it. I'm rationalizing this decision, and it's helpful and it's not sometimes. So what I learned is that through the process, like we have these blind spots, we have these cognitive limitations, and that, psychology says that our environment is extremely complex and we have computational limitations that we can become overloaded by information. We can't process all the facts, especially with the increase in technology and how much information is available to us. It overwhelms us. And as a result of that, our rational choices can become elusive. People can attempt to make really quick decisions at the expense of accurate ones. So when people are trying to make a decision, we have all of these biases, bias. where everything that supports the desire or the decision that we want to make will only those types of things. And we'll make satisfactory decisions as opposed to the best decisions for us. And we'll make them with imperfect information. And what I learned is that people are irrational and emotional. You know, the economic literature suggests that people are completely rational. They're fully rational all the time. And then it's like, no, the psychology literature suggests that people are irrational and they are emotional and they can make decisions that contradict their values. And the issue is that when we make bad decisions or unethical decisions, or we make decisions that just don't feel right in our body, where we're ignoring, the sensations in the heart, we're feeling our body, it's like, I don't think I should do that. But we allow the mind to take over. The mind becomes stronger than the body. The mind becomes stronger than the intuition. The mind isn't stronger than the body or the intuition. We allow it to be. And then we can misperceive relevant facts. We can draw incorrect conclusions. And we direct our attention away from some elements that are really important for us to focus on. And then we put our attention on the aspects of the decision that are just going to support whatever our mind wants us to do. People will they'll make decisions. People will satisfy their immediate concerns and they'll make poor decisions. So what they'll try to do is that if there's some short-term need, let's say a person becomes aware that maybe the relationship that they're in isn't good for them, but then it's not good for their long term, but their short-term desire is, I don't want to turn my life upside down. I want to continue being in this relationship. So they'll just satisfy their immediate concerns and they will forego the long-term benefits of making a potentially poor decision. So when people make bad decisions, they'll distort their perceptions through various types of rationalizations. They'll argue that this was the right decision that I had to make. I had no other choice. This was the best decision available to me at the time. And they'll constantly go through these rationalization processes. And then to further help them to overcome the idea of making a bad decision, people will then rely on various forms of escapism. They may emotionally consume. They may overeat, eat too much ice cream, eat too many chips, and do these types of emotional escapism to really try to re-emphasize the decision that they make. And ultimately, they try to convince themselves and other people that they made the right choice. And I want to just share, as I'm coming to the end of my presentation, some of the concerning future trends in the consciousness expansion space and the consciousness expansion industry. What I've observed is that over the past couple of years, there's been a surge in people that declare themselves mindfulness coaches. I think that can be wonderful. I think that it's great when people are entering the heart and they're operating from their heart and they want to be of service to humanity and they want to provide their knowledge to all the people that are going to need that support. I know that that is valuable. And I know that we're going to continue to need people that do that. The mindfulness coaching industry is growing at almost 12% per year, and it's expected to be $5 billion by 2028. What I've also noticed is that the global psychedelic market is increasing by 13% a year, expected to be $7 billion by 2028. And there's just this surge of people that are looking at it as a tool for spiritual growth. I talked about our culture of needing instant gratification. And what really concerns me is that the coaching industry, for the most part, is unregulated. There's not many ethical frameworks that are in place. In the psychotherapy space, there's ethical frameworks that practitioners need to abide by. There's clear boundaries that are in place. And what concerns me is that the global wellness market is valued at $4.5 trillion. And by 2028, 40% of the population of the planet, nearly half the planet, will be engaging in mindfulness practices. And what I've learned is this can occur walking across the street. They can also occur when engaging in mindfulness practices. And when that happens, people have this surge of needing content. And I witnessed from my own research is that people on the path can give their power away to other people, people that are gurus, people that are teachers, people that are masters. There's so many wonderful gurus, teachers, and masters out there, but there's also people that don't have the right intentions in place. And I fell into 3 cults in my spiritual journey, and they're out there. So my concern with all of this is that, and I don't mean to be, pessimistic or negative or cynical. I just see from this slide, I'm looking at it, and maybe it's through a lens of this may be a perfect storm. This may be a storm for people to get hurt, for people to be taken advantage of. So I really think it's important, again, to re-emphasize of listening to your body, trust your intuition. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You can't rush your healing. No one can heal you other than yourself. And if somebody promises that, you do a couple of ceremonies or sit in the presence of this particular person and you're going to have a transformative experience and your life is going to change, go and tell that to your non-spiritual friend and see what they think. So that's my last slide. I want to say thank you to everyone for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Apologize for the technical difficulties. I am in a rural area. There's a 5G tower right over there, but it's snowing outside and I guess it knocked it out for a second. So thank you very much for the space today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeffrey, for an incredible, both personal and research-based presentation. It's exactly what you said it was going to be. Fascinating. So if anybody has any questions for Jeffrey, please put them into the chat and I'll be happy to ask them on your behalf. So I'm going to start with a couple questions while people are warming up with the questions to ask you. So you've had numerous, you've told us about at least 2 very, very powerful STEs that have then continued with ongoing STE process, purification, etc. What do you feel at this point are some of the most important, or what is the biggest lesson you've learned through your whole spiritual awakening process to this point?
The biggest lesson I learned is twofold. One, and they're interrelated. One, always trust your intuition. No matter what anybody else tells you, trust your intuition and trust your body. If you know, if something just it's gonna be subtle. It might not be loud, but if you just get that little hesitation, follow that. Just trust that. That was something that I unfortunately had to learn the hard way in quite a few different occasions, but enough for me to now be able to say, okay, yeah, I know that feeling and I'm going to trust it.
Awesome. Uh, Heather has a comment and question here. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I loved your conclusions of coming back to common sense through intuition, body, critical thinking, and wisdom. She asked, may I ask what the three cults were that you had to deal with?
Yeah, so what I witnessed is that on the path, sometimes we want to join a community of like-minded people. So in my exposure to the three cults, that was really the intention behind it. And when I joined them, there was always this charismatic leader that people just, were following. And that was like the big part that showed up for me. Two of these cults were what I'm going to call rooted in cultural appropriation of indigenous values, and in particular around the shamanic philosophy, which was used, I would call, in ways that weren't respecting the tradition. And they were extremely dangerous, and didn't recognize it as a cult until some negative experiences I had occurred. So those were two of the cults that I had been exposed to, and I wasn't in them for very long. Actually, I wasn't in any of them for very long. I wouldn't be able to, well, one of them, I guess you could say I was a member for a good 10 months and didn't recognize what it was until afterwards. And then I was, I went to a silent meditation retreat, and this one was rooted in, again, in some ways, cultural appropriation of traditions, Buddhism, philosophies. And I witnessed that a lot of people in this particular community were somewhat stagnant and they were just following this particular leader. And I just wanted to, go on a 5-day silent meditation retreat, and never done that before. And this particular community that was recommended by a friend of mine, and joined it. And I went on 2 retreats, and then I just started to feel in my body that something's a bit off here. And then I started to listen to it and say, okay, I'm not going to be going back to any more of these particular sessions, but witness people, being a part of it for 15, 20 years. So it was like always that this doesn't feel right. Something's kind of off here. And like it's so easy. I mean, I'm an academic that have done research in all of these particular areas, and you know, do research on the blockages to people having spiritual awakenings, of giving their power away to somebody else. And then life served up an experience with saying, here's an example. What are you going to do here? Are you going to listen and follow along your lived and academic experience? I'm like, no, I'm going to go the wrong way just so I can double down on the experience and really make sure that I know what I'm talking about now.
Awesome. I talked in the same talk that you said impacted you about the propelled heart stage where people try out a bunch of different paths. So I think that's just normal, healthy exploration, and you followed your intuition. Same thing happened to me. There are a few paths earlier on that was, nope, this is not for me. So anyway, we have a few more questions here. The next question comes from, I believe it says Lisa. She says, thank you for this. It's been so helpful. Please, could you explain what a Kensho awakening is? Because I'm not familiar with it. How does this differ from other types of spiritual awakenings?
So with this particular awakening, it can be really subtle. There can be fireworks, like a Kundalini awakening. Somebody can have a Kensho and then it can cause like a Kundalini awakening. But in most cases, it can be very subtle. There's just awareness of normally people will observe life or reality through the filtration of the mind. The mind will filter their experiences, their egoic self structure will be very much at the forefront of navigating life. And it's with the Kensho, it's the mind falls back. The mind silences and the true nature, the true unlimited self comes forward. And it's like any type of spiritual experience, when we're explaining them, it's through language and it's through the conceptualization of the mind. And with a lot of these experiences, we go to a place where the mind can never go. And then when we come back, the mind will try to expropriate those types of experiences, will try to explain those types of experiences. So it's a difficult thing to articulate with words, just to preface with that. And it's, yeah, it's allowing the mind to fall away and the unlimited self that is fully present, that is actually just pure awareness, pure consciousness, to be present. And it could be an instant and it could be a permanent experience. It's a flip. It's like it ceases to be present. And in some ways, it's almost like you get the cosmic joke. And some people can just have, like, for me, like, I just started laughing. I was like, I can't believe that this is like ridiculous. This is what it is. And then I just had the awareness of that, with a lot of mystical experiences, there's this sense of oneness, of we're all connected and we are all the same. And it's, my consciousness lives in all of your consciousness, the same as it does in the tree outside the window and this pen. So it became it lasted for a couple of weeks and then the mind came fully back on. And I joined a cult 6 months later. Without my intention. My intention was like, my intention wasn't to join a cult, it never was. But yeah, I did.
It's all part of the journey. Fascinating. We have another question for you from Diane, and she'd like to know if you're comfortable sharing this, what are your regular or favorite spiritual practices? And do you have any advice for the most important things to keep in mind when one is trying to establish a daily spiritual practice?
So, what I think is important for people that are wanting to establish a spiritual practice is just be really attuned and aware of what they're getting pulled to. What are they interested in? What's drawing their attention? Is it yoga? Is it meditation? Is it some other type of practice? Is it a walking meditation? All these types of things. Just be aware of what am I being pulled to? And that's what I found for me is that after I had my Kundalini awakening, I was drawn to so many different consciousness expanding modalities. And I was also really interested in learning about different types of practices. Like I became fascinated with crystals and wanted to learn about that. And then I became fascinated with astrology and learned that. And then I taught myself how to read palms and was very fascinated about that. And then recently I got into tarot cards or, these types of Jungian modalities of the subconscious, basically. So I was drawn to different types of practices and different types of intuitive modalities and tools. So that's what I would recommend is just people be aware of what they're attracted to and who they're attracted to. And my spiritual practice has evolved over the years. The one thing that I highly recommend that is still present for me since I really started to incorporate a daily practice, and I recommend it to everyone, is grounding. Grounding is really, really important. I do it every day. Couple need it. So I ground every morning. The first thing I do as part of my spiritual practice, I smudge. I smudge throughout the day. I'm a very empathic person, and which really became heightened after the Kundalini Awakening, is that I'm aware that energies can absorb into me. And I'm also aware that I control that. And I know that a universal law is sovereignty. And if I claim my sovereignty, I know that my energy is going to be clean and clear. So I smudge daily. In the morning, as soon as I get up, I work with some essential oils, frankincense, and I'll sit in meditation with a white candle and I'll burn incense and I'll do a grounding meditation. I'll, sit in meditation for 10, 15 minutes. Over the past month, I really got pulled into tarot. So I do a 2-card spread for myself every day. And then I I do some yoga, stretching, mindfulness type practices. That takes about 30 minutes. And then I go on a 2-hour walking contemplation, walking meditation through the forest in nature. That's a very powerful aspect of my practice, and it allows me to connect to nature. Allows me to be aware of the plants and the animals and the messages that I can receive from both. I'm extremely drawn to the different types of trees. I hug trees, and I know that when, trees are energies or like people, basically, and I walk through the forest, I set my intention of greeting, and then if I find that if I'm carrying some energy or an emotion, I'll look out for a cedar tree, because our indigenous elders tell us that cedar is a very good purifying plant. And then I'll go right up to the trunk of it. I'll pass the energy from my heart and allow it to absorb into the tree. I do that a couple of times every day. And I'm just aware of, the birds that are around, what I'm thinking when they're present. And yeah, and I just have to share it today. I saw my first white rabbit in the forest. I've never seen a white rabbit in nature, and it just like ran, and it was like a white hair, and I was like, wow, that's so beautiful and powerful. And then I I'll do another yoga ceremony at the end of my workday. I'll do a 10-15 minute drumming, chanting of different mantras, or it might be indigenous, it might be, whatever, Hindu, Buddhist, different ones. And then I, say some prayers, close my energy off before I go to bed. That's my practice at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. It was very helpful, Jeffrey. Diane has a follow-up question. She too says, this is so helpful. Can you please say more about spiritual sovereignty? What is that?
Yeah, so I know that there's several universal laws, the universal law of cause and effect. There's the universal law of sovereignty. There's also the universal law of free will. So for the universal law of sovereignty, we are each individual, each being is sovereign. We choose whatever experience that we want to have. And we can, if we're finding that, we're being overwhelmed by the energy of somebody else, or we feel that as Einstein said, we're all connected and we're connected in ways that we don't see. And we have an aura and we have an auric field. And sometimes people can access that and they can enter that. And we can allow them at some level of awareness, subconscious or whatever. So if we feel that somebody's, interacting with us, and this can be speaking from my experiences, that if I'm constantly thinking about a person, or if I'm having a lot of negative thoughts, or if I'm feeling that I'm a bad dream, or I'm feeling negative, self-deprecating, or I'm not being very kind to myself, I'll stop and I'll say, I remove any energies that are not in my highest interest, that are in my particular space. I remove these, I reinforce my boundaries, and I reclaim my sovereignty. And by just using the words, I reclaim my sovereignty, and believing that, those sensations should cease immediately, at least it.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for a really beautiful, inspirational, and also very informative presentation. So thank you very, very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.